I want you all to take a deep breath and listen closely. Have you ever felt overlooked, mistreated, or crushed by the cruelty of someone else's actions? Have you ever laid in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying those painful memories from like a fresh wound? I'm talking about those moments when you gave it your all, your heart, your soul, your time, only to see the kindness thrown back in your face. It stings, doesn't it? It leaves a scar that no one else can see, but you feel it every day. And sometimes in the quiet of your own mind, you wonder if justice will ever find its way to your side. You question whether the cruelty inflicted upon you has gone unnoticed. You ask if God himself saw what happened, if he's aware of that betrayal, if he cares. Hear me loud and clear. God does care, and God will repay the cruelty done to you. You may not see the timeline. You may not know how it will unfold, but the promise stands firm. And that promise is here to remind you that your struggles aren't in vain. Your tears aren't wasted, and your dignity will be restored. Let me tell you why this matters. It matters because we live in a world where we often confuse silence for absence, where the hurt we experience can make us feel like we are completely alone, deserted in our suffering. We shrink under the weight of unfair treatment, believing no one will ever step in to make things right. We tell ourselves maybe it's our fault. Maybe we weren't strong enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to avoid being a target. My friend, that's a lie. The cruelty inflicted on you wasn't because you deserved it. It was because someone else failed to see the God-given value in you. And I stand here today not just as a voice of experience, but as a voice of reassurance. I want to speak to that hidden part of your heart that's still trembling. I want you to know you're not alone in your pain. God sees every tear, every heartbreak, every injustice. And in his time, he will settle the score. Don't for a second think that this is me telling you to sit back and let life happen to you. I'm not suggesting you become complacent or cold-hearted. No. I'm telling you that there's a power greater than your own. A power that carries you when you can't stand. A power that heals your wounds when human hands fail. And that same power demands accountability for every ounce of wrong committed against his children. I know you might doubt it sometimes, especially if you've been waiting for that justice, if you've been praying through nights that feel darker than you ever imagined. You might think, where is that repayment? Where is that balance in the universe? If God is so just, why do I still feel broken? Why do I still carry the heaviness of everything that's been done to me? Let me tell you why. Because God's timing and plan are different from our human expectations. We want immediate relief. We want immediate payback. We want the scoreboard to reflect the score right now. But life is not always about immediate gratification or instant proof. Sometimes the best repay, the best vindication, is the growth you discover within yourself, the resilience that emerges from your darkest hour, and the elevated perspective you gain when you realize your worth is not in the hands of those who mistreated you. And so we come face to face with a problem we need to solve. How do we endure the waiting? How do we handle the limbo of not knowing when or how God will repay the cruelty done to us? That waiting room can feel stifling. It can feel like the walls are closing in. But I want to address that tension tonight. I want to help you navigate this period to show you that even in the waiting, there is purpose. Even in the midst of the lingering pain, there is a path forward. You don't have to curl up in defeat. You don't have to surrender your joy, your hope, your future. Yes? The cruelty you've experienced has left a deep mark, but it hasn't taken away who you are at your core. It hasn't stripped you of the promise over your life. And that promise says this: God will restore everything that was lost, and God will ensure that justice prevails. It may not be easy to see in the moment. It may not even feel real right now. But I invite you to take my hand, metaphorically speaking, and walk with me into a deeper understanding of what it means to trust God's plan, to rely on His justice, and to find your own empowering solutions to move forward. Because the cruelty done to you is not the end of the story. The scars you carry are not the sum of your worth. You are so much more than a victim of someone else's wrongdoing. You are destined for renewal and redemption. I say these words with conviction because I've tasted that bitterness too. I've stood in shoes worn down by disappointment, fear, and anger at the unfairness of life. But standing here, I've learned that there's a power in letting go of the bitterness, in saying, God, I place this in your hands because I trust you know exactly how to handle it. There is freedom in releasing yourself from the burden of vengeance. God's justice is more complete, more righteous, more transformative than anything we could orchestrate ourselves. And I want you to feel that shift inside you, a rising sense of hope, a flame that refused to go out. Even if the world tried to extinguish it, even if the cruelty was designed to break you, that flame is still burning. And with each passing moment, as you step closer to believing in God's ultimate justice, you'll see how that flame guides you. You'll see how your wounds become testimonies, how your heartbreak becomes the foundation for a new strength you never knew you had. So as we dive deeper, I urge you to keep your heart open. Don't shut down because of past trauma. Don't close yourself off to the possibility that something far greater awaits you, because it does. And that greater plan, it's grounded in the truth that God will repay the cruelty done to you. Let's remind ourselves of that truth. Let's cling to it. And let's examine the ways we can see it manifest in our everyday lives. Because when it comes right down to it, we can't talk about faith without action. And we can't talk about action without hope. And tonight, my hope is that you walk away feeling emboldened, feeling seen, feeling like your story matters. Because it does. You matter. And no form of cruelty against you will go unanswered when it's held up to the light of a just and loving God. Let me underscore something crucial. Sometimes the toughest battles we fight are not the external ones, but the internal ones. The battles of doubt, of bitterness, of losing faith. I've watched good people become hardened by injustice, carrying that anger with them wherever they go. And I'm here to tell you that anger is too heavy for you. Vengeance is not your calling. It's not your cross to bear. So how do we let go without feeling like we're letting someone off the hook? How do we step into forgiveness without becoming doormats for more cruelty? How do we guard our hearts and still remain open to love? These aren't easy questions. They require us to dig deep, to confront our pain, and to trust a process that's bigger than our limited perspective. But I promise you, God sees it all. He hasn't checked out. He hasn't dozed off. He's fully present, and your story is being woven into a larger tapestry of redemption. You might just be in a chapter that feels dark, but I assure you, it's not the final chapter. There's more to come, and it's in that unfolding that God's justice becomes so incredibly clear. Believe in that, and believe in the goodness that still resides in your own soul. Now, let's take a closer look at what it means to trust in this repayment. Sometimes it begins with acknowledging that what you suffered was indeed cruel. We have a tendency to minimize our experiences. We say, it wasn't that bad, or I should just get over it. But let's be real here. Cruelty is cruelty, and it leaves a painful imprint on your heart. Maybe you faced emotional abuse from someone you loved. Maybe you were betrayed by a friend you trusted with every secret. Maybe you were passed over in a job where you were clearly qualified simply because someone decided you didn't fit their mold. Whatever it was, it stung like 1,000 knives. And in that moment, your sense of fairness was shattered. You asked, why me? What did I do to deserve this? But cruelty doesn't often make sense, does it? It attacks us in our most vulnerable places, aiming to break our spirit. That's the first thing to recognize it. You're a human being with real emotions, and those emotions deserve validation. It's okay to admit that you've been hurt. It's okay to acknowledge that you need healing. You can't move toward a solution if you're still trying to convince yourself nothing's wrong. What next? You need to face the consequences of denial. Denial traps you in a cycle of repeated pain. If you don't acknowledge the cruelty for what it is, you can't set boundaries. You can't take steps to protect yourself from further harm. And you certainly can't open yourself up to the possibility that God is working on your behalf. Instead, you remain stuck, replaying the same scenario again and again. But once you identify the harm, you can begin to shift your mindset. You can start speaking truths over your life. I'm worthy of respect. I am worthy of kindness. I am not alone. And there is a God who cares about every detail of my life. That shift from denial to acceptance is crucial. It's a form of self-love and an act of faith. You're telling your soul, I will not be defined by the cruelty done to me. I will be defined by my capacity to overcome it. You might ask, but how does this bring about God's repayment? Great question. Repayment doesn't always look like seeing the other person suffer. Sometimes we think justice means the one who hurt us must feel exactly what we felt. Yet, God's repayment is more about restoring what was taken from you. Your peace, your hope, your sense of worth, than it is about punishing your offender in a way that satisfies your human anger. While accountability is real, and people do face the consequences of their actions, God's way is higher than ours. It includes healing your wounds in a way that might surprise you, blessings that arrive out of nowhere, relationships that flourish despite the odds, or an opportunity that brings you joy you never thought you'd experience. Those are forms of divine repayment. So if you're expecting lightning to strike the people who wronged you, you might be holding on to an image that doesn't align with God's nature. Yes, but he is also merciful. What if he decides to transform their hearts? What if he decides to use your example to open their eyes? That might be the greatest repayment of all, because it breaks the cycle of cruelty entirely. Does that mean you should allow them back into your life with no caution? Absolutely not. That's why I say set healthy boundaries. If someone has shown you they aren't capable of treating you with respect, protect yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean you hand them the keys to your heart again without evidence of change. It means you release the bitterness and trust God to handle the outcome. Boundaries matter because they help you maintain your dignity and peace. They are part of your healing process. So if you're sitting here thinking, I must forgive, but I can't let go of the anger, understand that forgiveness is not an emotion. It's a decision. You decide to trust God more than you trust your desire for revenge. When you make that decision, you're not saying the cruelty was justified. You're saying, I refuse to be consumed by this. I choose to heal. And that choice to heal leads to a stronger, wiser you. A version of yourself that understands pain but is not owned by it. A version that can look back and say, Wes, that was awful, but I grew in compassion, in faith, in clarity. God's repayment often includes turning your wounds into wisdom. And wisdom is priceless. Wisdom shows you how to navigate life's storms with grace and confidence. And that sense of growth, that's part of your repayment. It's proof that cruelty doesn't have the final say. When you embrace that truth, you start noticing how your perspective changes. You notice you're able to smile again, to trust again, to dream again. And those shifts, small as they may seem, are monumental steps on your path to wholeness. Now, there's another layer to this, recognizing that not every setback is an attack, but when it genuinely is, learn to see it through a lens of divine perspective. Here's a story. I knew a man who poured his soul into a business only to be swindled by a partner he trusted implicitly. He lost almost everything: money, reputation, even personal relationships, because of lies spread about him. He couldn't sleep. He became bitter. For a time, he gave up on the idea of a benevolent God because he felt so betrayed. But slowly, he realized harboring that bitterness was killing him inside. He decided to place the entire situation in God's hands. He forgave. He set boundaries so he'd never again partner with someone without proper checks and balances. And with time, new opportunities arose. He rebuilt his life. He found success in ways he never imagined. And the man who cheated him, well, that man faced legal and financial consequences that eventually humbled him and led him to apologize. That's a powerful illustration of how God's justice can unfold. It won't always look identical in every situation, but the principle stands. Trust God to defend you, to vindicate you, and to lift you up in the aftermath. And in the meantime, do your part. Guard your heart, stay true to your values, and remain open to the blessings that come even when things appear dire. Let's be honest, though emotions can ambush us in the wee hours of the morning. Anger, resentment, memories of betrayal. They don't politely knock before walking in. They barge in and try to take over. So what do we do in those moments? We pray, we breathe, we speak truth over ourselves. I am not what happened to me. God's promise is greater than my pain. We remind ourselves that the cruelty once done doesn't dictate the future we can build. We reflect on moments of grace. Times we found comfort in a friend's words. Times we saw a random act of kindness that sparked hope. Times we felt a subtle sense of peace amid chaos. Those moments are traces of God's hand at work. Collect them, hold them tight. They're evidence that light still exists, that your story is not over, and that God hasn't abandoned you. Now, you might say, this all sounds good, but what if my situation is so complex that I don't see a clear way out? I'd respond, then take one small step today. Maybe it's talking to a counselor or a trusted mentor. Maybe it's writing down your hurt in a journal so you can process it. Maybe it's joining a support group at your place of worship. Maybe it's something as simple as going outside, letting the sun hit your face, and acknowledging that you're alive for a reason. Don't underestimate the power of small, intentional acts. They add up. They form a foundation of hope that God can work with. Because He's not waiting for you to be perfect. He's waiting for you to be willing. Let's circle back to that question. Will God really repay the cruelty done to me? Yes. But the bigger question is, do you trust Him to do it in His own way, in His own time, for a deeper purpose than just balancing some cosmic scoreboard? Because that's what faith is about. It's about relinquishing control of the outcome and believing that the God who created you, who loves you, who sees your potential, will not let cruelty have the last word. He will transform your pain into power. He will use your story as a beacon for others who feel lost. He will open doors you never thought possible. That's the essence of divine repayment. It's the redemption of your life's narrative. It's the turning of darkness into a testimony of enduring light. And now I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you're on the other side of this valley. You're standing tall, looking back at the road you traveled. The scars are still there, but they don't ache like they used to. The memories remain, but they no longer chain you to despair. You see how you emerged stronger, more compassionate, more alive. You notice how certain relationships realigned, how new friendships blossomed out of the ashes of betrayal, how opportunities appeared when you least expected them. You realize that through it all, God was orchestrating something far grander than you could have predicted. That image is not just wishful thinking. It's a preview of what can happen when you trust God's justice. And that's the place I want you to set your sights on, a place of freedom, a place of renewed hope, a place where your faith in a righteous God stands firm, unshakable, because you've seen His hand move. As we near the end of our time together, I want to make something very clear. None of this is about denying the pain you felt. It's not about telling you to just get over it. It's about pointing you to a higher perspective. It's about challenging you to open your heart and let God do what only He can do. It's about inviting you to release the heavy weight of revenge and step into the lighter, more liberating space of trust. Yes, it can be scary. Yes, it can feel uncertain, but certainty isn't always what we need. Sometimes we need a divine assurance that surpasses our limited understanding. That assurance is rooted in faith, fueled by hope, and fulfilled by a God who never forgets his promises. I want to recap the essence of what we've shared tonight. First, acknowledge your pain. Don't hide it. Don't pretend it's smaller than it is. And don't let anyone tell you that your feelings don't matter. Second, trust that God sees every injustice, every tear, every heartbreak. He's not blind to your suffering. Third, shift your focus from vengeance to growth. Vengeance might feel satisfying for a moment, but growth will carry you to a new level of life where peace and purpose coexist. Fourth, recognize that God's repayment often takes a form you might not expect. It's not always about punishing your offender. It's about restoring your soul, your opportunities, your sense of hope. Fifth, practice forgiveness as a deliberate choice, not a forced emotion. Set boundaries to protect yourself, but keep your heart open to the love and goodness still available in the world. Finally, hold on to your faith like a lifeline, because that's exactly what it is. Faith will keep you standing when everything else crumbles. Faith will whisper hope when your mind screams despair. Faith will remind you that the cruelty done to you has already been noted by the one who reigns over every storm. So how do we turn these truths into a practical, everyday reality? Start by speaking this simple affirmation each morning. God, I trust you to repay the cruelty done to me in your way, in your time. Help me focus on healing, on loving, and on growing. That small declaration sets the tone for your day. It reorients your mind from dwelling on the hurt to anticipating the healing. Then, do the daily work. If negative thoughts show up, counter them with gratitude. Maybe list 3 things you're grateful for. If you feel the urge to dwell on revenge, pause and remember how heavy that load is. Choose not to carry it. If you sense God nudging you to do something, like forgive someone, apologize for your own wrongdoing, or take a new step forward, obey that nudge. Often, our biggest breakthroughs happen when we follow that small, still voice prompting us toward growth. Remember, too, the significance of community. You don't have to walk this journey alone. Share your story with people you trust. Seek professional help if the trauma is weighing too heavily. Join a faith community that uplifts you. The point is to surround yourself with support systems that echo God's truth rather than the lies of the world. Because the world might tell you that cruelty is normal, that vengeance is the only way to regain control, that you should never trust anyone again. But if you listen to those lies, you'll end up isolated, bitter, and stuck. On the other hand, if you embrace God's perspective, you'll find yourself free. Free to hope, free to love, free to dream. That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To live abundantly, unchained by the past. Confident in the promise of justice, forging ahead with the knowledge that God stands by your side. Now, as you prepare to leave this space, physically or metaphorically, I want you to take away a call to action. Don't let the cruelty done to you define the rest of your days. Reject the label of victim and step into the identity of an overcomer. Each of you here has a purpose. Each of you here is a beacon of resilience waiting to shine. And when the forces of cruelty try to snuff out that light, remember who holds the final say. It's not the people who hurt you. It's not the system that overlooked you. It's not the heartbreak or the betrayal. It's God. He has the final word, and that word is victory. He will repay the cruelty done to you in ways that magnify His grace and lift you to a place of greater understanding, compassion, and power. But you've got to do your part. You have to show up for your own life, refusing to hand over the reins to bitterness. You have to find ways, big or small, to act on this hope, whether that's reaching out to help someone else in need, speaking truth into your own circumstances, or simply taking a moment each day to still your racing thoughts and listen for divine guidance. I know it's not easy, but no one promised that forging a path to freedom and peace would be easy. It's a challenge that will refine you, but it's also a blessing that will enlarge your spirit. Let this message sink. God's justice is bigger than your pain. It's bigger than your confusion. It's bigger than your heartbreak. There is no cruelty so hidden that it escapes His sight. There is no hurt so deep that He can't heal it. Let this spark a new determination in you to stand tall, to look at your reflections of sorrow and say, "You don't own me." God's promise does. Let it invigorate you to take meaningful action, to reclaim your sense of joy, and to march forward knowing that a righteous, loving force stands behind you. If you keep that at the forefront of your mind, cruelty will never crush you. Instead, it will become a stepping stone that raises you to a higher plane of faith and purpose. I want to leave you with a final thought, a thought that embodies everything we've discussed. Imagine your life as a tapestry being woven by an expert weaver. From your limited vantage point, you see knots, frayed edges, and tangled threads. It looks chaotic. It looks painful. But from the weaver's perspective, a beautiful pattern is emerging, one that will astonish you when it's fully revealed. Every thread of cruelty, every knot of hardship, every fray of disappointment is being used by God to create something magnificent. You might not see it now, but as you trust in His craftsmanship, you'll begin to see glimpses of glory, touches of redemption woven right into the fabric of your existence. That is the nature of God's repayment. He doesn't waste a single hurt. He transforms it. And in doing so, He transforms you. So walk out of here tonight with your head high. Let the world see the fire in your eyes. Let them see a person who has been tested, but not defeated. Let them see someone who refuses to bow to bitterness. Let them see in you the living proof that God can and will repay every cruelty with a redemption story. You don't have to convince everyone, and you don't have to figure out how it all works. You only have to believe. Believe and keep believing. Because the day will come when all the heartbreak you endured will be eclipsed by the light of a brighter tomorrow. And on that day, you'll stand in awe of how God turned your tears into triumph, your suffering into strength, your loss into a legacy of hope. That, my friend, is the power of a God who repays. That is the promise that lifts us out of despair. And that is the hope that we cling to tonight and every night to come. God bless you all. Keep the faith. Never stop believing that your life is worth fighting for. And never forget, God will repay the cruelty done to you. Go forth with that truth etched on your heart and let it set you free.